What really happens when a man earns $65,000 a month but lets his own son believe he is poor? How far can people go when they think the father at the table is weak, ruined, or naive? The night I walked into that dinner pretending to be a desperate man, I learned exactly how my son and his in-laws treated someone they believed was beneath them. And that moment became the beginning of my quiet, lawful revenge. Before we continue, we ask you to hit the hype button, subscribe, and like the video to help the channel grow. Tell us which city you are from in the comments. We would like to get to know our audience better. I pulled my worn jacket tighter as I stepped off the bus, watching it disappear into the October evening. The grocery store sat 3 blocks ahead, glowing under fluorescent lights that made everyone inside look tired and drained. I could have driven. I owned a car, a decent one actually, a silver sedan with leather seats and a sound system that still worked perfectly. But I kept it parked in a private garage across town where nobody I knew would ever see it. The registration sat in a folder in my apartment, renewed every year, insurance paid in full. But the car stayed hidden, just like everything else. The sliding doors opened with a mechanical sigh that echoed through the entrance. Inside, the air smelled like floor cleaner mixed with overripe bananas and something vaguely chemical that I could never quite identify. I grabbed a red plastic basket from the stack near the door and moved toward the produce section, keeping my head down, eyes forward. Over the years, I had perfected this routine. Old sneakers with worn soles, faded jeans that had seen better days, a jacket with a small tear near the left pocket that I had never bothered to repair. People looked right through me. I was invisible in the way that poor people often are. Present, but not noticed. Existing, but not acknowledged. A woman in heels and a tailored coat cut directly into my path, reaching for the last bag of organic spinach without so much as a glance in my direction. She did not apologize. She did not even seem to register that I had been standing there first, my hand already extended toward the same bag. I stepped back and picked up the regular spinach instead, the cheaper option, the one that fit the image I was carefully maintaining. At the deli counter, I waited while 3 other customers got served before me, even though I had been standing there first, my number clearly visible in my hand. The clerk finally looked my way with the kind of expression you give someone you wish would leave, someone who was taking up space that could be better used by someone else. "What do you need?" she asked, already glancing past me toward the next person in line, a man in a business suit who had arrived only seconds ago. "Half pound of turkey," I said, keeping my voice quiet and polite. She cut it open without a word, the machine humming loudly behind her, then set the package on the counter with sharper force than needed. She moved on before I could even say thank you, already calling out the next number. I paid in cash at the self-checkout, feeding crumpled bills into the machine one at a time. The machine beeped twice, rejecting a $5 bill that was slightly wrinkled at one corner. I smoothed it out carefully against the metal surface and tried again. Behind me, someone sighed loudly, the kind of sigh that said they were annoyed at having to wait, that they had better things to do than stand behind someone who could not even get a simple transaction right. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and exhaust fumes from the street. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I walked, the vibration sharp and insistent against my thigh. I shifted the grocery bag to my other hand and pulled the phone out. "Tyler." I stopped under a street lamp and opened the message, the screen glowing bright in the growing darkness. "Dinner tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Behave yourself. Marissa's parents will be there." I read it twice, letting each word sink in. Behave yourself, as if I were a child who needed reminding, as if I were someone who could not be trusted to act appropriately in public. I typed back a simple acknowledgement. Okay, and nothing more. No questions, no complaints. Just the kind of response a man in my position, the position Tyler believed I occupied, would give. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and kept walking, my footsteps echoing on the empty sidewalk. Tomorrow night would be interesting. I had been waiting for an opportunity like this, a chance to see exactly how far the disrespect had spread, how deep the contempt had grown. Tyler had been pulling away for months, ever since the wedding last spring. Every conversation grew shorter, colder, more distant. He stopped asking how I was doing. He stopped visiting. He stopped returning my calls unless he needed something. Now I was about to meet the people who had helped him decide I was not worth his time. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, a small one-bedroom unit in a building that had seen better decades. The paint on the walls was yellowing and peeling in places. The carpet in the hallway was worn thin in spots where countless feet had walked the same path over and over. The rent was cheap, $600 a month, utilities included. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor's television at night and the couple upstairs arguing every weekend. The hallway always smelled faintly of cooking oil and old carpet, a smell that never quite went away no matter how many times the landlord promised to clean the ventilation system. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, dropping the grocery bag on the counter with a soft thud. The apartment fit the image perfectly. A sagging couch that I had bought secondhand from a thrift store. A television that still had buttons on the side, the kind that nobody made anymore. A kitchen table with mismatched chairs, one of them slightly wobbly if you leaned back too far. Everything here told the same story. A man who had nothing, who had failed, who was barely getting by, who was one unexpected expense away from complete disaster. I walked to the closet in the bedroom and pushed aside a row of plain shirts hanging on wire hangers. Behind them, tucked into the back corner where nobody would think to look, was a small fireproof safe, the kind you could buy at any hardware store. I spun the dial carefully, listening for the clicks, and pulled the door open. Inside were things that told a very different story. Bank statements showing deposits that arrived like clockwork every month. Investment summaries tracking portfolios that had grown steadily over the years. Contracts with my signature on every page. Agreements that bound companies to terms I had negotiated. Tax returns showing income that would make most people blink twice and ask if there had been a mistake. $65,000 a month. I let that number sit in my mind for a moment, feeling the weight of it. Not a year. A month. After taxes, after deductions, after everything, that was what hit my account every 30 days, and nobody knew. Not Tyler, not his wife, not her parents. Nobody. I closed the safe and pushed the shirts back into place, making sure everything looked exactly as it had before. Tomorrow night, I would sit at a table with people who thought I was a failure. I would let them laugh. I would let them condescend. I would let them believe every single lie my silence had carefully constructed over the years. And I would remember everything, every word, every look, every casual cruelty disguised as concern, and when the time came, they would learn exactly who they had been dismissing. The next morning, I woke to the sound of a truck backing up somewhere outside, the beeping cutting through the thin walls like an alarm clock I had not set. Gray light filtered through the thin curtains, casting everything in the room in muted shades. I stared at the ceiling for a long moment, running through the plan in my head. Tonight would set everything in motion. I just needed to stay calm, stay patient, and let them show me exactly who they were. I got up and made coffee in the same chipped mug I had been using for 3 years, the one with a faded logo from a company that no longer existed. The machine sputtered and hissed, filling the small kitchen with the smell of cheap beans, the kind that came in a plastic container from the discount aisle. I drank it black, standing by the window, watching people hurry to work below, their heads down against the morning cold. Tyler had not always been like this. I thought back to the years after his mother left, when it was just the two of us in a cramped apartment not much different from this one. He was 7 then, small and confused, asking questions I did not know how to answer. Where did she go? Why did she leave? Was it because of me? I worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, one during the day at a warehouse, another 3 nights a week doing security at an office building. I came home exhausted, barely able to keep my eyes open, but I still helped him with homework at a kitchen table that wobbled if you leaned on it wrong. He used to look at me like I could solve any problem, like I was the strongest person in the world, like nothing bad could happen as long as I was there. Somewhere along the way, that changed. Maybe it started in high school when he noticed the other kids had more, newer clothes, better phones, cars their parents bought them for their 16th birthdays. I told him we were saving for his future, that sacrifices now would pay off later, that what mattered was not what you had, but who you were. He nodded, but I saw the resentment building behind his eyes, the slow realization that we were different, that we were less. College made it worse. He got into a good school, one I could afford because of the income he never knew about. I told him I had taken out loans, that we would pay them back together over time. He believed me. He met people with trust funds and summer houses, people who talked about family money and investments, like they were discussing the weather. He started comparing. He started measuring. And when he met Marissa during his senior year, everything shifted. She came from money. Or at least, her family looked like they did. Her father, Grant Llewellyn, owned a mid-sized firm that handled commercial contracts, the kind of work that sounded impressive at dinner parties but did not actually generate the kind of wealth people assumed it did. Her mother, Dana, spent her days organizing charity events and making sure everyone knew which country club they belonged to, which galas they attended, which causes they supported. They lived in a house with a circular driveway and talked about investments and portfolios, like the words themselves were status symbols. Tyler wanted that life. He wanted the house, the car, the image. He wanted people to look at him and assume he was successful, important, worth paying attention to. and to get it, he decided he needed to distance himself from the man who had raised him. I finished my coffee and set the mug in the sink, watching the last drop swirl down the drain. Tonight would hurt. I knew that already, but I needed to see it for myself, needed to confirm that the son I had raised, the boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street, would actually side with people who treated me like garbage. The day dragged. I went to work, sat through meetings where people discussed budgets and timelines, signed off on reports that carried my authority, even though most of the people in the room had no idea how much weight my signature actually held. I kept my head down, spoke when necessary, offered opinions when asked, and left right at 5, the same as always. By 6:30, I was standing in front of the mirror in my apartment, adjusting the collar of a shirt I had bought at a thrift store specifically for occasions like this. It was clean but worn, the fabric slightly faded, the cuffs frayed just enough to be noticeable. It was the kind of thing that said, trying but failing, that said, doing my best but coming up short. I paired it with slacks that were slightly too short, ending just above my ankles, and shoes that had been resoled twice, the leather cracked and dull. Perfect. I took the bus downtown, transferred once at the main station, and walked the last 4 blocks to the restaurant. It was the kind of place that had valet parking and a host who looked at you like he was deciding whether you belonged, whether you were the kind of person who should be allowed inside. I gave Tyler's name at the door, and the host's expression shifted into something almost apologetic, the kind of look you give someone when you realize they are connected to someone important, even though they themselves are clearly not. "Right this way," he said, his tone careful and neutral. He led me through the dining room, past tables filled with well-dressed people eating expensive food and drinking wine that cost more per bottle than I supposedly paid for rent. We moved toward a private section in the back, a space separated from the main room by frosted glass panels that offered privacy without complete isolation. The table was round, covered in white linen that looked freshly pressed, set with crystal glasses that caught the candlelight and threw small rainbows across the tablecloth. Tyler sat on one side, his posture stiff and formal. Marissa sat next to him, her hand resting on his arm in a gesture that looked more possessive than affectionate. Across from them were Grant and Dana Llewellyn, both dressed like they had just come from a business gala or a charity auction, the kind of event where appearances mattered more than substance. Tyler saw me first. His smile froze for half a second before he recovered, smoothing his expression into something that might have looked welcoming if you did not know him well enough to see the tension in his jaw. "Dad," he said, standing up and extending his hand across the table. "You made it." I shook his hand. It felt like a formality, like something he was doing because it was expected, not because he wanted to. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, keeping my voice even. Marissa gave me a tight smile that did not reach her eyes, the corners of her mouth lifting just enough to be polite but not enough to suggest genuine warmth. Grant looked me up and down slowly, his gaze lingering on my shoes for a moment longer than necessary, taking in every detail, cataloging every visible sign of what he assumed was my failure. "Aaron," Grant said, extending his hand without bothering to stand. "Good to finally meet you. Tyler's told us. A lot." I shook his hand. His grip was firm, the kind meant to establish dominance, to remind you who was in control. I matched it without squeezing back, just enough to acknowledge the gesture without turning it into a contest. "All good things, I hope," I said. Dana laughed, a light, tinkling sound that somehow felt cruel, like she was in on a joke I had not been told. "Of course," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that did not match her eyes. "Please sit." I took the empty chair between Tyler and Dana, lowering myself carefully into the cushioned seat. A waiter appeared immediately, moving with practiced efficiency, filling water glasses from a silver pitcher and handing out leather-bound menus that were heavier than they needed to be. I opened mine and scanned the prices, letting my eyes move slowly down the columns. Entrees started at $45. Appetizers were $20. Desserts were $15. "Order whatever you like," Grant said, waving his hand in a gesture that was meant to seem generous but came across as condescending. "Tonight's on me." "That's generous," I said. "Well," Grant said, leaning back in his chair and folding his hands over his stomach. "Someone has to take care of things." The words hung in the air like smoke. Tyler shifted beside me but said nothing. Marissa reached for her water glass, her eyes fixed on something across the room. The waiter returned, pulling out a small notepad, and everyone ordered. Grant chose the steak, cooked rare. Dana asked for the salmon with a side substitution. Marissa picked the chicken, dressing on the side. Tyler ordered pasta with seafood, something that came with a wine pairing. When the waiter turned to me, I picked the cheapest pasta dish on the menu, plain marinara with no additions, not because I needed to, but because it fit the story they already believed. As the waiter walked away, Grant leaned forward, folding his hands on the table in front of him, his expression shifting into something that might have looked concerned if you did not notice the way his eyes gleamed with curiosity. "So, Aaron," he said, drawing out my name like he was tasting it. "Tyler mentioned you're between jobs right now." I nodded slowly. "That's right." "Tough market," Grant said, shaking his head with exaggerated sympathy. "Especially for guys our age. What field were you in again?" "Technical consulting," I said. "Ah." Grant smiled, showing too many teeth. "Consulting. That's a tricky one, isn't it? Lots of competition. Hard to stand out unless you've really made a name for yourself. Built up a reputation, you know how it is?" "I did all right," I said. "I'm sure you did," Dana said, her tone dripping with false sympathy, the kind that made you feel worse instead of better. "It must be so hard, though, starting over at your age, having to rebuild everything from scratch. It takes real courage." I took a sip of water and said nothing, letting the silence stretch just long enough to feel uncomfortable. Marissa glanced at Tyler, then at me, her expression flickering with something that might have been discomfort. "Dad, maybe we should talk about something else." No, Grant said, waving her off with one hand. "I'm just trying to understand Aaron's situation. It's important for family to know these things. We're all in this together, right?" He turned back to me, his smile widening. "You're living in an apartment now, right? Renting?" "That's right," I said. "Smart," Grant said, nodding like I had just said something profound. "No point tying up money and property when you're not sure where you'll be next year. Flexibility is key. That's what I always tell my clients. Stay liquid. Stay mobile." Tyler looked down at his plate, his jaw tight. The food arrived, carried on large white plates by two different waiters who moved in perfect synchronization. For a few minutes, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. The weather, which had been unusually cold for October, a recent trip the Lewlands had taken to Europe, visiting France and Italy, Marissa's new job at a marketing firm downtown that she seemed proud of. I ate quietly, listening, watching, noting the way they talked to each other versus the way they talked to me. Then Grant's phone buzzed on the table, vibrating against the linen with a soft rattling sound. He glanced at it, his expression shifting briefly into something smug, then turned it face down without showing anyone what he had seen. Tyler noticed. He leaned over slightly, trying to catch a glimpse of the screen, but Grant shifted the phone away with a subtle movement of his wrist. "Work stuff," Grant said casually, cutting into his steak. "Never stops. That's the price of success, I suppose." Must be nice," I said quietly. "Having work that matters?" Grant looked up at me, his smile widening even further, his eyes gleaming with something that looked almost like pity. "It is," he said slowly. "Very nice." He raised his glass of wine, holding it up toward the center of the table. "Here's to success," he said, his voice loud enough that people at nearby tables turned to look, "and to knowing your place in the world." Everyone else raised their glasses. Dana lifted hers with a practiced elegance. Marissa hesitated for just a moment before following suit. Tyler raised his last, his movements stiff and mechanical. I raised mine too, and I smiled, because I knew something they did not. Dinner ended just after 9. The plates were cleared away by silent waiters who moved like ghosts, and Grant paid the bill with a credit card he made sure everyone saw. Black and sleek, the kind reserved for people who spent a certain amount every year, the kind that came with perks and privileges most people never even knew existed. He signed the receipt with a flourish, adding what I assumed was a generous tip, then stood and stretched like a man who had just accomplished something important. "Well," he said, buttoning his jacket with one hand, "that was lovely. We should do this again sometime. Make it a regular thing." Dana nodded, already reaching for her coat, which a waiter had appeared to hold for her. "Absolutely. Family is so important. It's the foundation of everything." Marissa kissed her parents on the cheek. First her mother, then her father, the gestures quick and practiced. Tyler shook Grant's hand with the kind of enthusiasm you usually reserved for someone offering you a promotion, his face lighting up with genuine warmth for the first time all evening. I stood by quietly, my hands in my pockets, waiting for my turn to say goodbye. Grant turned to me last, as if remembering suddenly that I was still there. "Aaron," he said, clapping me on the shoulder with enough force to make me take half a step forward. "You take care of yourself, all right? And if you ever need advice, job hunting, interviews, networking, anything, you just let Tyler know. I've got connections, people who owe me favors. I could make some calls." "I appreciate that," I said. "Anytime," Grant said, squeezing my shoulder once more before letting go. Us men have to stick together, help each other out. That's how the world works. He walked away before I could respond, Dana following close behind, her heels clicking against the polished floor. They disappeared through the front entrance into the valet area, where I could see through the glass doors that someone was already pulling their car around. Tyler turned to me, his expression shifting back into something neutral and distant. You want to ride home? I'm fine, I said. I'll take the bus. You sure? It's late. Yeah, I'm sure. He hesitated, his mouth opening like he wanted to say something else, then closed it and nodded. All right. Thanks for coming tonight. It meant a lot to Marissa's parents. Not to him, to Marissa's parents. Of course, I said. Marissa looped her arm through his, already pulling him toward the door, her movements impatient. We should get going. Early morning tomorrow. That presentation I told you about. Tyler gave me one last glance, something unreadable flickering across his face for just a moment, and then he was gone too, following his wife out into the night. I stood alone in the entryway for a moment, listening to the muted sounds of the restaurant behind me. Silverware clinking, voices murmuring, soft music playing from hidden speakers. Then I walked outside into the cool night air. The bus ride home felt longer than usual. I sat near the back, in a seat that smelled faintly of cleaning solution and old fabric, staring out the window at the blurred lights of the city sliding past. My phone buzzed once, a message from Tyler. Thanks again for tonight. Glad you could make it. I typed back a short reply. No problem, and put the phone away. When I got back to my apartment, I did not turn on the lights right away. I just stood in the dark, letting the silence settle around me like a blanket, feeling the weight of the evening pressing down on my shoulders. Then I walked to the bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out the safe. Inside, beneath the bank statements and investment summaries, was a single folder. I had labeled it weeks ago but had not opened it yet, waiting for the right moment, waiting until I was absolutely certain. Llewellyn Group, Compliance. I set it on the kitchen table and sat down in one of the mismatched chairs. For a long time, I just stared at it, thinking about what would happen once I started down this path, once I set things in motion that could not be stopped or undone. Then I opened it. The first page was a contract summary showing the relationship between my firm and the Llewellyn Group. Grant's company had been relying on my team's technical assessments for 2 major projects, both of which were contingent on regulatory approval. Without my signature, neither project could move forward. Without my team's documentation, the entire operation would stall, investors would panic, and everything Grant had built would start to crumble. The second page was a list of discrepancies I had noticed over the past 6 months. Small things, mostly, minor inconsistencies that probably meant nothing on their own, but together formed a pattern. Misreported timelines that made projects look more advanced than they were. Inflated cost projections that boosted profit margins on paper. A few invoices that did not quite add up when you looked at them closely. Nothing illegal, necessarily. Nothing that would land anyone in prison or trigger immediate investigations. But enough to make investors nervous. Enough to raise questions. Enough to create doubt. I closed the folder and leaned back in my chair, staring up at the water-stained ceiling. Grant had no idea who I was. None of them did. They saw a man in cheap shoes and a frayed shirt and assumed he was powerless, that he was someone to be pitied or dismissed or tolerated only out of obligation. They saw someone quiet and mistook it for weakness. They saw someone simple and mistook it for stupidity. They were wrong. I put the folder back in the safe and locked it carefully, spinning the dial to scramble the combination. Then I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights spreading across the darkness like stars scattered on the ground, and let myself think about Tyler. He had been 7 when his mother left. 7 years old, confused, scared, crying himself to sleep most nights for the first month. I remembered the way he used to hold on to my hand when we walked to school, like he was afraid I might disappear too, like if he let go for even a second, I would vanish and he would be completely alone. I remembered the questions he asked. Why did she leave? Where did she go? Was it his fault? Did she not love us anymore? And the way I tried to answer them without letting him see how much it hurt me too, how much I was also struggling to understand. I had given him everything. Every dollar I earned went toward keeping us stable, keeping him safe, giving him opportunities I never had. I worked late into the night, missed school events I wanted to attend, turned down promotions that would have required relocating to cities where we had no connections, all because I wanted him to have a normal life, a stable life, a life where he did not have to worry about money or security or whether we would make it through another month. And now he sat across from me at dinner, silent, while a man he barely knew talked about me like I was a charity case, like I was someone who needed to be taken care of, someone who could not take care of himself. I closed the blinds and went to bed, but sleep did not come easily. I lay in the darkness, staring at shadows on the ceiling, replaying the evening over and over in my mind until the sky outside started to lighten with the first hints of dawn. The next 2 weeks passed slowly, each day blending into the next in a haze of routine and waiting. Tyler called once, a short conversation where he thanked me again for being understanding about dinner, for not making a scene, for knowing my place. He did not apologize for anything that had been said. He did not ask how I was doing or whether I needed anything. He just wanted to make sure I knew that everything was fine, that there were no hard feelings, that we could all move forward and pretend the evening had been pleasant. I told him it was fine. Work continued as usual. I sat in meetings where people discussed quarterly projections and resource allocation. I reviewed reports that ran to dozens of pages, technical assessments that only a handful of people in the industry could actually understand. I signed documents that kept multi-million-dollar projects on schedule, my signature authorizing expenditures and approving timelines. My colleagues treated me with respect because they knew what I did and why it mattered. But outside the office, I remained invisible. One afternoon, I ran into Riley Kent in the lobby as I was heading out for the day. We had worked together for nearly 5 years, ever since she joined the firm as a junior attorney fresh out of law school. Now she handled corporate compliance, making sure every contract we signed was airtight and every regulatory requirement was met to the letter. She was also one of the few people who knew the truth about my financial situation, not because I had told her directly, but because she had access to the same internal documents I did. "Aaron," she said, falling into step beside me as we walked toward the elevator. "You look tired." "Long week," I said. "Aren't they all?" We stepped into the elevator together. Riley pressed the button for the 10th floor and leaned against the wall, studying me with the kind of attention that made most people uncomfortable. "You still keeping up the act?" she asked quietly once the doors closed. "Yeah." "How's that going?" "About as well as you'd expect." She nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "You know, one of these days, you're going to have to stop hiding." "Maybe," I said. The elevator doors opened, and we stepped out into the hallway. Riley paused, turning to face me fully, her arms crossed over her chest. "When you're ready," she said carefully, "let me know. I've got some ideas." I looked at her, trying to read her expression. "What kind of ideas?" She smiled, but it was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that suggested she had already thought through every possible angle and outcome. "The kind that make people pay attention," she said. She walked away before I could ask what she meant, her footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. That night, I went home and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, opening it slowly and waiting for it to boot up. The screen glowed in the dimness of the apartment. I opened my email and scrolled through the usual clutter, meeting invitations, project updates, automated reminders about deadlines and deliverables. Then I saw one that stood out, the subject line catching my eye immediately. Annual Family Banquet, Llewellyn Group. I opened it, my pulse quickening slightly. The message was formal, almost stiff in its language. It announced that the Llewellyn Group would be hosting its annual banquet in 6 weeks, a black tie event to celebrate the company's achievements over the past year and introduce new projects to potential investors. Family members of employees were encouraged to attend. The event would be held at a downtown hotel, with dinner and presentations scheduled throughout the evening. At the bottom of the email, someone had added a handwritten note in digital ink, the letters slightly uneven as if they had been written quickly. "Aaron, please sit in the back row, Marissa." I read it twice, feeling something cold settle in my chest. 6 weeks. That gave me time. Not a lot, but enough. I pulled out my phone and texted Riley. "We need to talk." She replied within minutes. "Tomorrow. Courthouse Cafe, 10 a.m. I set the phone down and stared at the wall across from me, at the faded paint and the small crack running from ceiling to baseboard. For a long time, I had convinced myself that Tyler would come around, that he would see through the Llewellyn's arrogance and remember who had raised him, who had been there when he needed someone, who had sacrificed everything to give him a better life. But tonight, reading that email, seeing those words, "Please sit in the back row," I realized the truth. He was not going to change, and if he was not going to change, then I needed to stop waiting for him to. The Courthouse Cafe sat on a quiet corner 2 blocks from the district courthouse, the kind of place where lawyers met clients before hearings and paralegals grabbed coffee between filings. It was small, dimly lit even during the day, with mismatched furniture and a menu written on a chalkboard behind the counter. The coffee was strong and the food was cheap, and most importantly, it was always half empty. Perfect for conversations you did not want overheard. Riley was already there when I arrived the next morning, sitting in a booth near the back. She had a folder open in front of her and a cup of tea cooling beside it, steam no longer rising from the surface. I slid into the seat across from her, the vinyl creaking under my weight. "Morning," she said without looking up. "Morning." She closed the folder slowly and folded her hands on top of it, finally meeting my eyes. "So?" she said. "You're ready." "I think so." "You think so, or you know so?" I hesitated, weighing the words carefully. "I know so." She nodded slowly, studying my face for any sign of doubt or uncertainty. "All right, then let's talk about what that means." She opened the folder again and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a timeline, marked with dates and notes written in her precise, careful handwriting. Events were listed in chronological order, each one numbered and cross-referenced with supporting documentation. "Here's what I'm thinking," she said, tapping the paper with one finger. "The banquet is in 6 weeks. That's your stage. That's where everything happens. But we need to build the foundation now, quietly, so that when the moment comes, you're not scrambling. We need everything organized, verified, and ready to present." "What kind of foundation?" "Documentation," she said. "Verification. Contracts showing your role and authority. Income statements proving your earnings. Ownership records establishing your stake in the firm. Compliance reports showing the Llewellyn Group's dependence on our technical assessments. We package it all together, make it airtight, and then we wait." "And at the banquet?" "At the banquet," she said, leaning forward slightly. "You hand it to me, I present it, and everyone in that room learns the truth." I leaned back, letting the plan settle in my mind, thinking through the implications and consequences. "What about Tyler?" I asked quietly. Riley's expression softened slightly, the hard edges of her professional demeanor giving way to something that might have been sympathy. "That's up to you. I can structure this so it hits the Llewellyns without touching him directly. But if he's standing next to them when it happens, he's going to feel the impact. There's no way around that." "He's already made his choice," I said, the words coming out harder than I intended. Riley nodded. "Then we move forward." She slid a checklist across the table. It listed documents, dates, and action items, each one neatly organized with checkboxes and deadlines. The list was comprehensive, covering everything from employment verification to financial disclosures to regulatory compliance records. "Start here," she said. "Get me everything on this list by the end of next week. I'll review it, make sure it's bulletproof, and then we finalize the presentation. We'll have one shot at this. It needs to be perfect." I took the checklist and folded it carefully into my pocket. "One more thing," Riley said, her voice dropping lower. "Once we do this, there's no walking it back. The Llewellyns will know who you are. Tyler will know. Everyone at that banquet will know. Your life changes the moment that folder opens. You sure that's what you want?" I thought about the restaurant, the condescending smiles, the way Grant had looked at me like I was something to be pitied, something unfortunate that good people had to tolerate. The way Tyler had stayed silent, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on his plate while his father-in-law talked about me like I was not even there. "Yeah," I said. "I'm sure." Riley smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "Good. Then let's make it count." We finished our coffee in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. When we finally stood to leave, Riley paused at the door. "Aaron," she said, turning back to look at me. "For what it's worth, they're going to regret underestimating you." I did not respond. I just nodded and walked out into the morning light. I spent the rest of the day at work, moving through meetings on autopilot while my mind ran through everything I needed to do. That evening, I went home and pulled out the safe again, spinning the dial with practiced precision. This time, I did not just look at the documents. I organized them, income statements from the past 3 years showing consistent deposits that added up to numbers most people would never see in a lifetime. Contracts showing my role in projects the Llewellyn Group depended on, my signature appearing on page after page of technical assessments and regulatory approvals. Ownership records proving I held a significant stake in the consulting firm that Grant's company relied on for every major decision. I made copies of everything, using the small printer on my desk that I rarely touched. I labeled each file clearly, creating a system that Riley would be able to navigate instantly. I placed them in a new folder, one that was thicker and heavier than anything I had assembled before. By midnight, it was done. I sat back and looked at the stack of papers on the table, illuminated by the dim light from the kitchen. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I felt a flicker of doubt. Not about the plan, but about what it would mean for Tyler. He was still my son. No matter how much he had pulled away, no matter how much he had hurt me, no matter how thoroughly he had chosen his new family over the one that had raised him, that did not change. But I also knew that if I did nothing, the disrespect would continue, it would get worse, and eventually I would disappear entirely from his life, reduced to nothing more than an embarrassment he mentioned once in a while at family gatherings, a cautionary tale about what happens when you do not work hard enough or aim high enough or care enough about success. I could not let that happen. I locked the folder in the safe, turned off the lights, and went to bed. But again, sleep was slow to come. I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the building settling around me, thinking about everything that was coming. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation. I met with Riley 3 more times, each meeting longer and more detailed than the last. We went through every document line by line, checking dates, verifying signatures, cross-referencing information with public records and internal databases. She worked with the precision of someone who had spent years building cases that could not be torn apart, cases that held up under scrutiny no matter how hard opposing counsel tried to find weaknesses. By the time we finished, the folder was a masterpiece of legal clarity. Every claim was backed by evidence. Every number was verified. Every connection was documented. If anyone tried to dispute what we presented, they would look like fools, or worse, like liars. "This is solid," Riley said during our last meeting, flipping through the pages one final time, her eyes scanning each document with professional thoroughness. "If anyone tries to challenge this, they'll regret it immediately." "Good," I said. She handed the folder back to me, her expression serious. "Keep this safe. Don't let anyone see it until the banquet. And when the time comes, just hand it to me. I'll take care of the rest. You won't have to say anything unless you want to." I nodded, feeling the weight of the folder in my hands. At work, things continued as normal. I signed off on project milestones, attended budget reviews, participated in conference calls with clients who had no idea they were talking to someone who could shut down their entire operation with a single email. I kept my head down, maintained my routine, and gave no indication that anything was about to change. Tyler texted me twice during those weeks. The first message was a reminder about the banquet. "Don't forget. A black tie, 7 p.m., Hotel Meridian downtown." The second came a few days later, shorter and colder. "Try not to embarrass us." I stared at that second message for a long time before deleting it, without responding. 3 days before the banquet, I received an envelope under my apartment door. I almost missed it when I came home from work, nearly stepping on it in the dim hallway. Inside was a formal invitation, printed on heavy cardstock with gold lettering that caught the light. The Llewellyn Group logo was embossed at the top. My name was printed in elegant script, and at the bottom, someone had added another handwritten note, the ink slightly smudged. "Mandatory attendance. Seating assignment, back row, table 12. I set the invitation on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time. Back row, table 12. They wanted me out of sight, tucked away in a corner where nobody important would notice me, where I would not interfere with the image they were trying to project. It was the kind of casual cruelty that came naturally to people like the Llewellyns, the kind that did not even register as cruelty in their minds because they genuinely believed I belonged there, that my proper place was in the shadows where I could not damage their reputation. I picked up my phone and called Riley. "It's happening," I said when she answered. "I know," she replied calmly. "I got the same invitation. I'll be there. What do I need to do?" "Just show up," she said. "Bring the folder, and when the moment is right, you'll know." The morning of the banquet, I woke early and went through my usual routine with deliberate precision. Coffee in the same chipped mug, shower in the cramped bathroom where the water pressure was weak and the temperature unpredictable. A long walk through the neighborhood to clear my head, watching the city wake up around me. By the time I got back, it was almost noon. I spent the afternoon organizing the final pieces, triple-checking everything even though I knew it was already perfect. I pulled out the folder, checked every document one last time, making sure nothing was out of place or missing. Then I placed it in a leather briefcase I almost never used, one I had bought years ago for a company event and had not touched since. Then I went to the closet and looked at the suit hanging in the back. It was the only expensive thing I owned that anyone might see tonight. Charcoal gray, tailored to fit perfectly, cleaned and pressed until every crease was sharp and precise. I had bought it years ago when I first started making serious money, before I decided to hide everything, before I constructed the careful illusion that had defined my life for so long. I dressed slowly, taking my time with each detail. The shirt was crisp white, the fabric smooth against my skin. The tie was silk, a deep blue that complemented the gray of the suit. The cufflinks were simple but elegant, silver rectangles that caught the light. The shoes were polished to a mirror shine, expensive Italian leather that felt completely different from the worn sneakers I usually wore. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The man staring back looked confident, successful, like someone who belonged in rooms where decisions were made and power was traded, like someone who mattered. I grabbed the briefcase and walked out the door. The hotel where the banquet was being held sat in the heart of downtown, a towering building with a lobby full of marble and glass and architectural features designed to impress. I took a cab instead of the bus, watching the city slide past the window as we drove through streets I usually walked. When we arrived, I stepped out onto the curb and looked up at the building. People in suits and evening gowns were already streaming through the entrance, laughing and talking, their voices echoing off the high ceilings inside. I could see through the glass doors into the lobby, where chandeliers hung from the ceiling and staff members in uniforms moved efficiently between guests. I walked through the doors and into the lobby. A staff member greeted me immediately, a young woman with a tablet in her hands, checking my name against a list displayed on her screen. "Mr. Hale," she said, her smile professional and welcoming. "Welcome. The ballroom is on the 3rd floor. Elevators are just ahead." I thanked her and walked toward the elevators, briefcase in hand. Around me, people milled about, sipping cocktails from crystal glasses and exchanging pleasantries. A few of them glanced my way, their expressions briefly curious, trying to place me, wondering if I was someone they should know. Then they moved on, returning to their conversations. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 3rd floor. The doors closed, and I was alone. For a moment, I just stood there, listening to the hum of the machinery as the elevator climbed, watching my reflection multiply in the polished metal walls. My face was calm, composed, ready. The doors opened, and I stepped out into the beginning of the end. The ballroom was enormous, all high ceilings and chandeliers that cast warm light across the space. Round tables were arranged in neat rows facing a stage at the far end, each one covered in white linen and set with china and silverware that gleamed under the lights. People filled the space, hundreds of them, their voices blending into a low hum of conversation punctuated by bursts of laughter. Waiters in black vests moved between the tables like dancers, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I scanned the room, looking for my assigned table. It was exactly where I expected. Back row, far left, tucked into a corner where the lighting was dimmer and the view of the stage was partially blocked by a support column decorated with fabric and flowers. Tyler and Marissa were already seated near the front, at a table close to the stage where the important people sat. Grant and Dana sat beside them, both dressed like they were attending a state dinner. Grant was leaning back in his chair, gesturing broadly as he spoke to someone across the table, his voice carrying even over the general noise of the room. Dana nodded along, her smile fixed and perfect, her posture impeccable. I made my way to table 12 and sat down in the chair facing the stage. The other seats were empty. Apparently nobody wanted to sit in the back row either. The table setting in front of me was identical to all the others. Fine china, crystal glasses, folded napkins shaped like swans. A waiter appeared almost immediately, materializing at my elbow. "Can I get you something to drink, sir?" "Water," I said. He nodded and disappeared as quickly as he had arrived. I set the briefcase on the floor beside my chair, positioning it carefully where I could reach it easily. Then I waited. The room continued to fill over the next 20 minutes. More people arrived, more laughter, more clinking glasses, more networking and glad-handing, and the kind of social maneuvering that happened at events like this. A few people glanced my way, their expressions briefly puzzled, as if they could not quite figure out why someone dressed like I was would be sitting alone in the back corner. But none of them approached. None of them asked who I was or why I was there. At exactly 7, the lights dimmed slightly. The conversations quieted, voices dropping to whispers. A man in a dark suit stepped onto the stage, tapping the microphone to make sure it was working. The sound echoed through the ballroom, sharp and metallic. "Good evening, everyone," he said, his voice projecting clearly through the speaker system. "Welcome to the annual Llewellyn Group Banquet. We're so glad you could join us tonight." Applause rippled through the crowd, polite and enthusiastic. The man continued, welcoming special guests, thanking sponsors, running through the usual formalities that nobody really listened to, but everyone pretended to appreciate. I barely heard him. My focus was on the stage, on the moment that was coming, on the folder in the briefcase at my feet. After a few minutes, the man stepped aside, and Grant Llewellyn walked up to the microphone. More applause, louder this time. Grant smiled, soaking it in, his chest lifting a bit as he waited for the noise to fade before he spoke. "Thank you," he said, his voice smooth and confident. "Thank you all for being here. Tonight is about celebrating what we've built together, the partnerships, the projects, the incredible success we've achieved as a team." He went on, talking about quarterly earnings that exceeded projections, new contracts worth millions, future growth opportunities that would take the company to even greater heights. His voice was practiced, rehearsed, the voice of a man who had given this speech many times before, who believed every word he was saying. Then he paused, his gaze sweeping across the room slowly. "Of course," he said, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more personal. "Success is not just about business. It's about family. It's about the people who support us, who stand beside us, even when times are tough, even when things get difficult." He gestured toward the front table, where Tyler and Marissa sat. "My daughter and son-in-law are perfect examples of that. They've worked hard, built something meaningful together, and they've done it with integrity and determination. They make us proud every single day." Tyler smiled, his face lighting up with genuine pleasure. Marissa reached over and squeezed his hand, her expression soft and affectionate. Grant's eyes drifted toward the back of the room. For a moment, I thought he saw me. Then he continued, his smile taking on a different quality. "And then, of course, there are those who, well, let's just say not everyone contributes equally. Some people show up because they have to, not because they have anything to offer. Some people are here because of obligation, not because of merit." A few uncomfortable laughs scattered through the crowd, nervous sounds from people who were not quite sure if Grant was joking or being serious. I felt the eyes of nearby tables turning toward me, people leaning toward each other and whispering, trying to figure out who he was talking about. Grant did not name me. He did not have to. "But that's all right," he said, his smile widening, his tone becoming almost magnanimous. "We take care of everyone. That's what family does. We support each other, even when some of us don't really deserve it." He raised his glass of champagne, holding it up toward the audience. "To success," he said, his voice ringing out clearly, "to partnership, and to knowing where you stand." The room erupted in applause, people rising to their feet, glasses raised, voices calling out agreement. I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping against the floor cut through the noise like a knife. Heads turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Grant froze, his glass still raised, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion in the space of a heartbeat. I picked up the briefcase and walked toward the stage. The room went absolutely silent. Every step echoed. People leaned forward in their seats, whispering frantically to each other, trying to figure out what was happening, whether this was planned or some kind of disruption. Tyler half stood, his face going pale, his hand reaching out toward me like he wanted to stop me but did not dare actually touch me. Marissa grabbed his arm, pulling him back down, her eyes wide. I reached the stage and climbed the steps, my movements calm and deliberate. Grant stared at me, his smile completely gone now, replaced by something that looked like panic barely held in check. "Aaron," he said quietly, but the microphone picked up his voice, broadcasting it to every corner of the ballroom. "What are you doing?" I did not answer. I walked past him to the center of the stage and set the briefcase down on the podium. Then I opened it slowly, the latches clicking in the silence. Inside was the folder. I pulled it out and held it up so everyone could see. The pages thick and substantial, undeniable. "My name is Aaron Hale," I said, my voice steady and clear, projecting without shouting. "And I think it's time we cleared up a few things." The room was absolutely still. You could have heard a pin drop. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document, holding it up so the people in the front rows could see the letterhead, the signatures, the official seals. "For the past 3 years," I said, "I've worked as a senior technical consultant earning $65,000 a month." A murmur ran through the crowd, starting soft and then building, voices rising in shock and disbelief. Grant took a step back, his face draining of color, his mouth opening and closing without making any sound. I held up the next document, this one showing ownership percentages and shareholder agreements. "I also hold a 12% ownership stake in the consulting firm that provides regulatory approval for every major project the Llewellyn Group undertakes." The murmur grew into a roar. I saw people pulling out their phones, others leaning toward each other and talking frantically, some standing up to get a better view of the stage. The energy in the room shifted completely, confusion giving way to something sharper, more focused. I turned to face Grant directly, looking him in the eyes. "Without my signature," I said slowly, making sure every word was clear, "none of your current projects can move forward. Without my team's technical assessments, your investors pull out. Without my approval, everything you've built grinds to a halt." Grant's mouth worked silently. His hands were shaking. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to fall. I pulled out the final document, the one that mattered most, the one that would change everything. "This," I said, holding it up for everyone to see, "is a formal withdrawal of support. Effective immediately, I am rescinding my firm's cooperation with the Llewellyn Group on all active projects. All technical assessments are suspended. All regulatory approvals are revoked pending further review. All contracts are voided. The room exploded. People shouted questions, their voices overlapping and echoing off the high ceiling. Others stood up, chairs scraping, some moving toward the exits. Phones were everywhere now. People making calls, sending messages, the glow of screens lighting up faces across the ballroom. Grant stumbled backward, nearly falling, his hands reaching out for support that was not there. I looked out at the crowd and found Tyler. He was staring at me, frozen in his seat, his face a mixture of shock and something else, something that might have been fear or recognition, or the dawning realization of what he had done. "You treated me like I was nothing," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "You laughed at me. You condescended to me. You told me to sit in the back row because you were embarrassed to be seen with me, because you thought I was weak, because you thought I was poor, because you thought I was worthless." I paused, letting the words sink in, letting them hang in the air. But the truth is, I was the only one holding your world together. I closed the folder, picked up the briefcase, and walked off the stage. Behind me, the ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. I walked through the crowd without looking back, my eyes fixed on the exit at the far end of the room. People stepped aside automatically, creating a path, their faces a blur of confusion and shock and disbelief. Someone called my name, but I did not stop. I just kept moving toward the doors, the briefcase still in my hand, my heart pounding but my expression calm. Riley was waiting near the exit, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. She gave me a small nod as I passed, her lips curving into the faintest hint of a smile. "Clean," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the noise. "Very clean." I did not respond. I pushed through the doors and into the hallway beyond, the sounds of the ballroom immediately muffled by the thick walls. The noise faded as I walked toward the elevators, my footsteps echoing on the polished marble floor. I felt strangely calm, calmer than I had felt in years, like a weight I had been carrying for too long had finally been lifted, and I could stand up straight again. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside. As the doors began to close, I caught one last glimpse of the ballroom entrance. People were spilling out into the hallway now, their voices rising in panic and confusion. I saw Grant stumbling through the crowd, Dana clutching his arm with both hands, both of them looking lost and small and suddenly very old. And then I saw Tyler. He was standing just outside the doors, separate from the crowd, staring down the hallway toward me. Our eyes met for a brief moment across the distance. I could not read his expression, shock, anger, regret, maybe all three at once, maybe something else entirely that I had no name for. The elevator doors closed. I rode down in silence, the hum of the machinery the only sound. When the doors opened again, I stepped out into the lobby. It was quieter here, just a few hotel staff moving about, checking their phones, adjusting their uniforms, completely oblivious to the chaos unfolding 3 floors above them. I walked through the lobby and out onto the street. The night air was cool and crisp, carrying the smell of rain that had not yet fallen. The city stretched out around me, lights glowing in windows, cars moving through intersections, people going about their lives completely unaware that anything had changed. I stood there for a moment on the sidewalk, just breathing, letting the reality of what I had just done settle over me like a blanket. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. 3 missed calls from Tyler, 2 from Marissa, a dozen text messages, all of them appearing in rapid succession, all of them frantic, all of them asking variations of the same questions. What just happened? Is that true? We need to talk? Call me back. Please. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I turned the phone off completely, holding down the power button until the screen went dark, and slipped it back into my pocket. Then I started walking, away from the hotel, away from the chaos, away from everything I had just destroyed. The briefcase swung slightly at my side. My shoes clicked against the pavement. The city moved around me, indifferent and eternal. And for the first time in years, I felt completely, utterly free.